Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first of the webinars supporting the publishing show, which is, as we all know, very exciting times. Events are back across the world, but they're back to the UK. And the publishing show is going to be opening its doors at Excel on the 22nd and 23rd of June. So we hope that you will join us there. This webinar today is all about building and monetizing engaging 365 communities. My name is Ed Tranter. I am the Managing Director of 73 Media. And whilst these days my life is fully immersed in events, my background originally was publishing. And we were talking just before we all started, RD and I, about the fact that I used to publish a magazine called Marketing Week, which back then didn't actually have a website, which just goes to show how old I am. Don't let the teenage attire fool you. And in that time, how it was always then the holy grail was creating engaging communities. How are we going to monetize it? How are we going to get people and drawing them all together? And that challenge seems to not have gone away in any way, shape or form. And we all know it's easier said than done. And so to help guide us through to success here, I'm delighted to introduce RD Whitney. RD is the Chief Exec of 365 Media. He's the co-founder of the Virtual Events Institute. In fact, I've completed that course, which I can heartily recommend, and have been part of RD's sessions when going through it. He's the co-founder of Trailhead Talent, and with over 30 years successfully building and engaging communities that bring buyers and sellers together and building recurring revenue streams for businesses, he is clearly the right man to take us through this topic. So morning, RD. Thanks.
Good morning. Good morning, Ed. Thank you for the introduction, and really excited to discuss this topic today.
Yeah, so I think the big question is, because obviously it's first thing in the morning for you being in the States. So I just to put everyone's mind at rest so that they can know the answer one way or the other, are you wearing pajama bottoms and just a shirt on top?
I'm in Florida, so I'm wearing shorts.
Okay, good man. That's what I like to hear. So welcome everyone that's joining us. More people joining all the time, which is great. RD's going to take us through some great case studies that he's pulled together and really talk through the practicalities of building community. But before I pass over to RD to do that for us, we will have questions at the end. So please do be thinking about what you want to ask. Pop those questions in the chat and we will get through as many as we can in the time frame. But in the meantime, let's maximize the time with the maestro. So I'll pass over to RD. Thanks, RD.
Thank you, Ed. We're going to talk today about building Engage 365 communities. We're going to just talk a little bit about a background, which some of the experiences I've had in building communities and that we do for clients. I want to give 4 specific examples because a lot of times people talk about building communities and it becomes a very vague topic. So I want to talk about specific community examples here. I want to talk about how this interacts with this great marketing shift that is happening and talk a little bit about that. And talk about a community for communities that we've put together that you can jump into and pull out a lot of tools and resources if you're considering building your community, and how to get started with a minimally viable product, or let's call it a minimally viable community. So, but hopefully what today's session does is spark some ideas, spark some specific ideas where you can think about your media assets and bring that together to start on the journey to develop that into a community, because there really is no one better positioned than the publishing organizations. And to that point, Ed and I were talking at the beginning of this, is everybody now suddenly wants a SaaS business. They're the most highly valued businesses. They want the recurring revenue streams. But over the years, the high margins of events have sort of taken center stage, and magazines and other publishing products have been looked down on at times. Well, now they're all hot again, right? Everybody wants those, and I'm going to talk about how those all interact together to create pillars of a community. So the good news here is the people on this call, the professionals on this call, there is no one better positioned to create shareholder value by building communities than publishers with publishing assets. So let's talk about that a little bit. Ed covered my background, but for 30 years, I've been building communities. It just didn't have a name until fairly recently, when communities started to become very hot. I have been that crazy guy in the corner at large event companies saying, hey, we've got a great event. Let's build some other assets around that. And let's turn that into a community. I started out in groups like Wolters Kluwer and Thomson, sort of specialized publishing organizations where you would pay a very high price to subscribe to need to have information, which I know will resonate with a lot of the publishers on the phone today, on the call today. I worked at IDG, but the epiphany of my career came just at 25 years old. I was commuting into Cambridge, Mass. From New Hampshire, where I was raising my daughters, and two very smart brothers came in and bought a sleepy publishing company in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire, a small little town. And I could see the sort of the change that was going to happen here. So I said, I'll take whatever job you got. And the thing that was exciting to me was, and perhaps you might see this in the publishing industry even today, that company defined itself as a format. Oh, we're a directory company, or we are a newsletter company, back in those times when we used to subscribe to newsletters and pay for them. So that's what they were. They were a format company. And what these brothers had said is, you know what? It's not the format. It's the content and the connection to buyer and seller that is really going to be the explosion that's going to create all this gravity to connect buyer and seller and create a lot of value. And that's exactly what happened. That small little publishing company went from $1 million purchase to a $48 million sale, and is now part of what is Bloomberg today. In just 48 months, and so you think about, like, how did that happen? Well, that directory, in that case, was a directory of executive recruiters, and all that directory had data that connected, let's call them buyer and seller, between the executive job seeker market. Well, that became the backbone of Chief Monster and Career Builder and all these new job boards that were coming out at the time. And we knew that HR professionals needed to learn about this stuff. So we had never done an event before. So why not start at the Jacob Javits Center? We rented that and sold that out. And suddenly we had a multi-million-dollar event. And we were doing formats that hadn't really even been created yet, like the corporate executive board's format of peer networking, where you charge a subscription price to bring peers together so that they can solve each other's problems and learn from each other's successes and failures. These are all components of a community that I'm going to talk a little bit about. I've worked at a lot of the larger event companies, media companies, specialized publishing, but when I think about it and boil it all down, it's really been about building community. 365 Media, just real quick, is we help clients build communities. And clients can be nonprofits, associations, corporations, and media companies. We recently helped even groups like Clarion. They had an event called Coffee Fest that they couldn't run because of the pandemic. We helped them develop the strategy around launching Coffee Fest 365. We've been doing that type of work in all different industries. And I will say that I haven't found an industry that the community model doesn't work in. It is really an exciting expansion. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But that's what we do. During COVID, I, with three other co-founders, founded the virtual events industry, which now trains and forma markets, Hyatt hotels, corporations, and organizations all around the world. There was an incredibly timely need for people to learn best practice around virtual events during the pandemic, and that's what we filled. And I love it because sometimes when we're building these institutes or these communities, I call them institutes in my focus area, they say, well, who are you to do that? And I say, well, we deliver the exact right information at the right time in the format that the consumer needs it. So I just want to, zone in on this yellow highlighted area here a little bit, because I focus specifically on these community building formats listed here. And I think of them literally as pillars that hold up a community. And I think this is helpful to think about a community. Again, people talk about community in sort of vague aspects. I see these formats, going back to that example I mentioned at the beginning of my career, these formats, of which publishing has many, to be what holds up a community. Conferences, trade shows, online training, virtual events, industry award programs, SaaS businesses, research, databases, validation, which I can talk a little bit about, publishing, peer learning, online marketplaces, certification, sponsored membership businesses. So really for publishers, the world is your oyster. You can expand into all these different markets and have what everybody is craving, which is a thriving community. And I love this analogy. So when my daughters were younger, I had the opportunity to bring them to Yellowstone. And there is this geyser there, famous geyser called Old Faithful, which goes off very consistently. And the park ranger explained that because of the caldera here, because of what had happened here in evolution, there were three ingredients, heat, water, and plumbing, that come together at the exact same time to cause this consistent explosion that happens with Old Faithful. And I think of that in relation to these pillars, because many listeners today on the webinar may have one of these formats. Maybe you have an event, maybe you have a publishing product, maybe you have an online membership business. But the more pillars you can pull together, the stronger that community is. And what I've found is that if you can bring 2 or 3 of them together, you can get this kind of consistent reaction, that there's a benefit from several of these being together in the same orbit. So I'm going to now just go into some very specific examples of communities that I've built. I've called them institutes. And maybe that will spark some thinking as you think about your publishing assets. This started the Institute of Finance and Management, IOFM.com, started as a bankrupt newsletter. It was a newsletter product that people in the profession, accounts payable professionals and accounts receivable professionals, would pay a hefty price to subscribe to. But as the internet was gaining traction, and as we all know, a lot of the publishing products and the monetization of the publishing products fell apart. So we were able to pick this up in bankruptcy, and we turned those newsletters, accounts payable newsletter, accounts receivable newsletter, into the Institute of Finance and Management. We literally kind of combed through the content and developed that content into tools and resources and different pieces, which I'm sure exists in your portfolio now. It's just a different way of thinking about it. A lot of times an article, is interesting, but not that useful. But nobody wakes up and says, oh, I wish I had something more to read. There's way too much to read. But if you could take the components of that article and turn it into a tool and put that behind a paywall and have enough tools in there that it's useful to the people in that job function, then that suddenly becomes very valuable and a recurring revenue stream. So that's exactly what we did here. We created the Institute of Finance and Management. We called it IOFM because those were the only 4 letters we could find left on the GoDaddy. We actually backed into the name because we found IOFM, Institute of Finance and Management. So in 24 months, we took what was that bankrupt newsletter, and it was then had grown incredibly and sold to Diversified Communications, which has grown really nicely. But the way we got started here was we took that publishing product and first started with putting those tools and resources behind a paywall and getting those subscribers converted over to a membership instead of a subscription. We then started doing events, of course, and we started in Disney and Vegas, and those really started to take off. And we had a certification program that we grew very nicely. And that sounds like a major undertaking, but really we already had the content. We had trainers, people that were in the profession that knew the profession inside and out. And I remember even just in the early days, we started in the basement of one of the trainers, and we had a backdrop behind them. We were recording online training with her, and literally the backdrop fell down and you could see her laundry from behind. So, these things don't have to be, you can get started in very modest ways, but that all took off. And in 24 months, as I said, it was acquired by Diversified. I think Diversified really acquired it because it had large growing events, and I'm not sure that they really associated a lot of value to these other properties. But I went with it, and for 4 years, I built up at Diversified a group called the BCOM Group, Business Communities, and we were able to try to experiment with this model in other areas. Now think about the pandemic and how important these models are, because you go through something like what we've just gone through, you just shift the focus a bit and spend more time focusing the marketing on the membership and the certification program. That certification program today, by the way, if you're in those professions, you're getting that certification program because Robert Half recognizes it, that you receive higher compensation. The controllers want it to make sure that all your blind spots are covered, because fraud happens in those areas. And you can't learn that profession in college. It was always on-the-job training. So that's what we look for in these communities is places where there is no professional home. I think that's a really important thing to think about, no professional home, and really kind of carve out that niche and develop a community. I bet if you think about your publishing assets, there's a lot of them. Example number 2 was as Diversified bought IOFM, I was able to bring the Administrative Professionals Conference into my portfolio. It was an amazing show. 2,000 administrative professionals coming, paying a very high price to attend. But it was just an event. We had a free membership, which they could attend webinars and see some content. But we launched a certification program. 2 million admins in America. Why not try to sort of carve that out and get on top of that education? But more importantly, make that show a need to attend instead of a nice to attend. So that certification program grew very rapidly, these programs you can see becoming 6-figure businesses very quickly. Just the certification programs, and margins of 90%. So rivaling trade shows, really incredible. But here's the cool thing: that show a few years later it grew very rapidly, and I believe that there's cause and effect here. That by really investing in the sort of the membership in this case, which was a free membership, and the certification program, adding that area of education in, really grew the show. So anybody that says that these models replace the show or threaten the show, it's not true. They enhance the show and grow the show. Here's another example, sort of my most recent example before I went on my own in 2020. I got brought into something called the Validation Institute. And just a quick story here. Really interesting when you think about these pillars and the different ways you can monetize a community. So Validation Institute was actually started, it was a joint venture between Intel and GE. They were coming out with a healthcare point solution that would be sold directly to the employer. Now, I know I'm speaking today with a lot of people from the UK, and that idea of employers buying health insurance doesn't translate. But just think about them as the buyer, the employers, because they're buying health insurance for their employees. And think of this GE Intel group called Validation Institute. Actually, they had a product that they were selling to that employer. So they wanted to make a marketing claim that this by bringing this in, it would reduce healthcare costs or improve your employees' quality healthcare outcomes. But they realized they could say anything they wanted. There was literally no rules about what you could say from a marketing claim standpoint. And they knew this because their competitors were making marketing claims that were mathematically impossible. So a very smart guy said, you know what, there needs to be some kind of third-party institute to sort of validate these marketing claims. And they put themselves through it first. So they set up an outside entity. They had a data analyst, and it was very simple. So that product was making a marketing claim. There had to be some kind of an intervention or some type of data that was being based on. And then this third-party institute could validate that data and say, yes, that lines up. So they did that, and this really caught on because it was very needed. So I stepped into this as CEO. It had become it was acquired by an investor, and I joined as CEO. And I realized that the other side was the one in this case that actually needed the support to make this thing pop, is the buy side, right? So the buy side in this case was getting educated by the exact same constituents that make more money when the rates go up and the services go down, which would be insurance companies and brokers. So there was no independent or third-party education. So we created something called the CHVP, the Certified Health Value Professional Program. We created 10 modules of online learning, and then that got accepted by SHRM because there was a real need in the marketplace, and those HR folks could be better buyers. There's a men's clothier in the East Coast of America here for years called Sims, and they had an advertisement that said, "An educated consumer is our best customer." And that's what we thought about here. Is like, if we can educate the consumer and introduce them to validated suppliers, that would make a better marketplace. And I say this because I want you to think about your sponsors and the marketing claims that they're making and your buyer side. And nobody, literally nobody, could be in a better position to help validate the claims on the sell side and help the buyer side get educated. So just another model to think about. And as you think about it, kind of think about the ecosystem around your niche publishing area of opportunity. So on the left is one at Diversified. We were, by the time we had grown IOFM there, we started looking in other areas like accounting technology, and Diversified acquired the Account Tech business, which is in the UK as a large trade show. So we created this ecosystem because the buy side had no organization of what these vendors, it was just a big mess. So on the left side of the screen here, that's a visual representation of the buy side. I think this is a really neat device to think about, is to think about your ecosystems in your niche communities. Could you visually represent them and put a version control on the bottom of that and give that out? And then it's very helpful to the buy side, but also the sell side. The vendors want to be in that. They want to make sure they're in the right category and everything. So it creates like a roadmap for them. On the right side is one I did for Tarsus when we were launching a medical technology event. So think about this technique a little bit. So one more specific example. So 2020 comes, what a year. And I had decided I was going to go out on my own after 30 years of working for other companies and everything, and finished up at the Validation Institute. And I got put on a webinar about the monetization of webinars. Just a little history there. When I've worked for Tarsus for 2 different stints. And the first time I ran their online media division. And I used to be CEO of something called TSNN, Trade Show News Network. And at that time, back in 2007, 2008, we were covering this new thing called virtual event technology. It was coming in and it was very clunky. And today, when I talk to reporters, I say I kind of felt like Noah. We were building an ark and it was bright and sunny out, because people didn't appreciate the virtual event developments that were happening at that time. And rightly so. They were clunky platforms. And they were not really focused on the customer and the buying experience that happens. But I stuck with them. I became on the board of OnStream Media, which was a NASDAQ traded company that invented webcasting and had done lots of virtual events throughout my career. And so COVID hits and my phone starts ringing, and I get on a virtual event about the monetization of virtual events. And people from all around the world came on it. Here is a press release back in 2010. We had covered, we'd done a study on virtual events, 2010, and we found exactly what we're finding now, is that virtual events extend the value of the physical show. It's complementary. It's not a replacement. Of course, we had to do it during the pandemic, but I argue that it's just a pillar in the community. It's another way to engage your audience 365 days a year. Just 10 years too early. So I get on this webinar about the monetization of virtual events back in April of last year. And I think 15,000 individuals came on this webinar series. I had by now developed several certification programs throughout my career and built several institutes and communities. So myself and 3 other co-founders said, there's a real need here right now for the education around virtual events. They need it very quickly. It needs to be delivered online. So by July of last year, we launched the Virtual Events Institute, and amazing CEO, Sophie Ahmad, out of the UK, just did a tremendous job getting this out very quickly. Fantastic online education, and it grew very rapidly. Today, it educates informal markets, Hyatt hotels, and corporations and associations all around the world, and it's just really growing quickly. But here in this example, the community started with online training, right? And then next it went to, we want to see everybody's best practices and an awards program. Another pillar example there, we launched an awards program so that you invite people to bring in their best practices so everybody can see their best practices. Then that leads to the membership model. So you can see as the pillars get added, this community growing very quickly. So I just, about community, there are so many different types of community. It could blow your mind. We're here obviously as publishers focused mostly on the communities that exist for the same reason that the media and publishing businesses exist and the event industries exist, because there's some buyer and seller connection there that's monetizable. But there are just so many. But what is it? How do you define community? I love earlier this year, TechCrunch came out with this quote that the chief community officer is the new CMO. And that really made me think, wow, that's what's happening. You have this convergence of media companies now suddenly sort of going back to that model where they want to surround their audience with all different formats of media, online membership, online training, yes, live events, of course, when we can do them, virtual events, online directories, marketplaces, just so many examples of way to surround your community. And I like what they said, community isn't any single Slack group, event, or newsletter. It's an aggregation of all these touch points. I call them pillars that includes both customers, eventual customers, and one-time users. Think of this in relation to Peloton. I think about what a community that has become. Or even before that, Instapot. That was, I think, one of the all-time largest sellers on Amazon, but it was really driven by community and passion around cooking and a different type of cooking. I put in bold here what I think is the definition. It's a home. It's a home for a niche community. It's a place of belonging, and I also believe it's the future of marketing. So here you've got this entire movement of corporations, associations, media companies to want to control their audience. So there's been community building for years and years, of course, and it kind of went off the rails because of social media. You have so many zombie LinkedIn groups that we built up these communities within LinkedIn, and then they took away all the controls. What's happening now, and because of the ease of doing this, is that there's just such an opportunity to develop very quickly your own community, put these pillars in it, and own it yourself so nobody can take it back away from you. Here's the Harvard Business Review talking about this direct consumer business model. This is happening because of community. Marketing is evolving. You've got all this movement to community. And this is what I see here, is this evolution. So all the way from Mad Men, Don Draper days, to direct marketing, to one-to-one marketing, to the shift to sort of this crazy shift to social media marketing and all the interaction that brought. And that's why I have on the XS there, low to high customer member prospect interaction, just shooting up because of social media. But it was chaos, and it is chaos. And but that kind of being brought in because of inbound marketing with groups like HubSpot and others, just trying to rein that in because of the gravity of content, which the publishers on the webinar today will appreciate. But now that's just going straight up because of community, because we can now own these communities, drive these communities, and help this interaction between buyer and seller because of the passion of that community. So So my organization helps companies develop communities. But what we really saw, there was so much interest and need in this area that what was missing, and if anybody there is a Seinfeld fan, you'll remember Kramer had an idea for a community for, he had an idea for a coffee table book of coffee tables. Well, we were working for a lot of clients that needed sort of the tools and templates and resources and things like that. Just the basics of building a community, and that we could bring peers building communities together in its own community. So a community of community leaders, of which if you shoot me an email, I'll send you an invite into. But we've loaded it up with hundreds of tools and resources, and it's constantly being posted by people that are sharing their best practices around building community. But it is just such an explosive area. But let me just sort of wrap this up here by getting you thinking about even other ideas as you think about your media assets, because that is the most important part, is to think about what you have to work with and how can you get to that next step in a pragmatic way. So I suggest you think about your media asset. Is there a specialized education opportunity or an online training like we did with the Virtual Events Institute? Is there a niche area you could carve out and develop into an institute-like model? Are there any tools and research sort of buried in your content that you could pull out and turn into a tool or research? Are there peer-to-peer best practices that you could bring them together, that audience together, or benchmarks? Nobody is in a better position than you probably as a publisher to do these things. Is there a creative way to develop a unique recurring revenue asset? I give this example of rig data. About maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I was at a specialized information industry event and sat next to someone who had bought in bankruptcy a directory called rig data, and it listed out all the components on an oil rig in the Gulf. So important that stuff is all listed out, but not very useful because that stuff changes so fast. How could you ever keep a directory there? So he took it in and he put it in a website, and he put a paywall in front of it. And suddenly it was starting to change much more rapidly and became very useful. Well, when I last touched base with him, he had mentioned that it was over a $10 million business. And how could you be in this industry in any way and not have access to this as a supplier or a buyer? So just think about things that are probably sitting in your content right now that you could put behind a paywall and create that. I'm going to give another example of that. Just a couple bullets down here is Store Track. My partner at 365 Media realized that all these, so in America, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but we have all these storage facilities because we have so much stuff in our garage that we have to rent another garage to put stuff in. So these things have propped up all around America. So if you are a mom and pop owner of one of these, how do you know what to charge for that garage or closet, and which was quickly becoming a big business? So they often had websites, and on the websites, they listed what they did charge, but there was no way to kind of understand if that was market rate. You don't want to charge too little or too much, so you don't have capacity. So my partner realized that, all that information was literally sitting out there on the web, but what if you could bring that all together, put it behind a paywall, and charge a subscription for it? Well, if you're in that business today, Store Track, you need to have a subscription to this, because this helps define your pricing model. So like another example where so much multi-million dollars of value was created by simply finding information that was probably already out there buried in some way and bringing it to the customer in a more organized way, which then can develop a first pillar of community. So those are a couple of examples. The IOFM example I mentioned there, we started with creating a membership, and then that developed into events and online community and certification. So they all worked in tandem together as they started to all gain traction. But think about how your publishing assets could be developed into that. Very low risk to start. Glad to talk to anyone on this webinar today about this. My contact information is here below. But can you create a minimally viable product? Let's call it a minimally viable community. Could you think about any of these pillars that I mentioned here and develop a community for yourself.
Well, thanks very much for that, RD. Like a lot of these things, really insightful, so much detail, so much coverage, but so much opportunity. But I've got a few questions. We'll start to take questions as they come through, but I've got a few questions for you, because when you explain it in the way that you have it, I mean, not without downplaying it at all, it almost sounds simple, but obviously it clearly isn't simple. So if I'm interested in starting a community, what's my first steps? What's those kind of bedrock steps that make sure I've got a platform to really kick on and be successful?
Great. So let me start by saying what should absolutely not be your first step. Don't worry about the technology or the platform. That comes after. Your first step should be really thinking about the media assets you have to work with, and the personas of the audience that is drawing in now from the publishing product. So where's the buyer-seller connection? What's the gravity that's bringing those two together? And how could you build one of these pillars off of that? Can that be done by, creating a series of professionally produced recordings? Because, the game has been up considerably, but it's very easy and inexpensive to do. And I'm not talking about just creating online recordings of something like this, where it's just, us talking to an audience, but more like what you'd see in the Virtual Events Institute. If you go through VEI training, Ed, you probably realize this as you were going through. It's like it was designed to say, okay, well, here's some objectives to learn. Okay, here's the background behind that, and then here's an exercise for yourself to go, kind of really reinforce that and apply that to yourself. So could you do that? And then, or is it better to kind of dig into your publishing assets and pull out those tools, put them behind a paywall, have some teaser copy in front of the paywall, and then bring people over maybe as a free member where it costs to access the premium tools? There's so many ways to think about this, but planning that out first and understanding that is more important. And then it's so simple to apply the tools to it after.
So it's that. What's your destination? What's your aim? What are your KPIs? What does your market actually want from each direction? Because you have your sellers and your buyers, and they want different things, but they mutually overlap. And finding out, really nailing that down is your first step. And you mentioned technology loosely there, but obviously technology is a huge part of delivering, particularly in the world that we're in now. I mean, we were talking, as I said before the camera went on, and we were talking about trying to build community back in the publishing days when I started, which makes, as I say, very old, but there was no internet. So community was done through mailers and direct mailing and using the publication, which meant you actually took quite a lot of time over it. Do you think there's a danger with the access to technology that people do jump that first step? Because, as you say, the barrier to entry is quite low. So it's kind of like, let's just chuck a load of stuff at it, get it up. I've got a logo, bosh, and then try and create things with a load of content that no one comes to. Is that a distraction we should avoid?
Yeah, and that's what we see all the time. That's the reason for failure. And what we end up with is thousands and thousands of zombie communities out there where they get started, they get a little bit of traction, and then they fall apart. So yeah, really thinking through the value proposition for both the buyer and seller, why they are going to be part of this, what the monetization opportunity is. I like this idea of sustainability. My wife is a financial director for a nonprofit called Habitat for Humanity here in the United States. The reason I mention that is, so they build homes for the less fortunate. It's not a handout, it's a hand up. But they could fully be funded by just asking people for donations, of which they get. But they have this thing called the Restore, which is a retail outlet that everybody that does a renovation donates the materials to, and so doesn't Lowe's and Home Depot, of things that can't be sold. And then they use the funds from selling that in a retail to fund Habitat, so it's sustainable. Right. So I apply that to community and really think about what's sustainable. Whether you're you're a nonprofit, a for-profit, I would imagine most of the people on today's webinar are really thinking about the monetization and profit opportunities here. Really sort of think about that. What is that sustainability? And there's one other point that kind of just reminds me of is a lot of people sometimes say in these institutes, oh, is that a nonprofit? Nope, absolutely not, right? Because, you see a lot of these nonprofits try to tackle some of these areas, and the discussion becomes more about the executive director's compensation than it does about the members of the benefits of the members. And a for-profit entity really, what does it do? Customer service. It really tries to identify what's important to the member, the customer. So I think these things should be for-profit. Absolutely. .com it, and serve your members really, really well.
No, well, I think that makes sense. And yeah, as you say, it's been, the last year has seen quite a lot of change, but also a lot of engagement. And I would suspect, I mean, I'm not obviously the expert that you are, but I would suspect actually that a lot of communities that are genuinely engaging have seen significant growth as people reach out to their community for support during the COVID period. Whereas those that actually aren't really there, as you say, these zombie communities, people kind of look at them and think, actually, what am I doing being part of this, and have cut them off. And I imagine that the separating the chaff from the wheat, it's a bit like those businesses during COVID that just sat there and waited for everything to get better. Yeah. And coming back to your point, those that innovate, that see opportunity and seize it, rather than waiting for the other guy to and piggybacking on it, actually are the ones that are going to make the best foot of it. So coming on to, you talked about tech, obviously, and don't rush into that first, but it seems that there's a huge volume of different technologies for everything now that are moving at a phenomenal rate. So when we come to choosing a tech platform, how do we go about that? What's the best advice you would give? And particularly in some businesses, there's that tendency to, I want my own thing that fits my business, over which often can cost a lot more money, and you don't know what you don't know, particularly when you're starting out. So if you're going to go down that line, how do you make sure you've got the best advice to future-proof it so you don't get sort of hung out to dry by it at a later date?
Yeah, well, I like this concept of minimally viable product, and failing quickly, and I also like this formula that I read once in Fortune magazine, maybe 15, 20 years ago. It was S equals F squared. Success equals failure squared. So I'm not just talking about just sort of throwing things out willy-nilly, but really thinking about, developing this and but then launching in a minimally viable way. When we launched Virtual Events Institute, we started selling that training program before any courseware had even been developed. Think about that. So, but then, we were really on the hook to deliver on schedule. We told everyone that the modules were going to come out on this cadence, and we did. But people got behind that. And so you don't have to go spending the whole amount of money all in one shot, in one shot. But on tech, you could go try to build the perfect community and build the tech. And I like this phrase that, oftentimes perfect is the enemy of really good. Or you could literally, we're tracking over 1,000 solution providers in the community space. We have a full database of these, and we track them. There are micro solutions. Like, let's just say you wanted to do a really good forum discussion type of community, just to kick things off. There's certainly some great solutions there. Let's say you wanted to get a little bit more of a community where you can load in some tools and resources and have some multi-way conversations going and be able to sell online training. There's very easy off the shelf. And I'm talking a few $100s a month to rent the software, right? Not to buy anything. So you can get started, kind of using that. And what we've successfully done is gotten started using that, and then had a really good sort of transitional program to get them over to what you're going to build. Once it starts really working, step on the gas, think about investing, and build that ultimate community around the uniqueness of your of the need there.
Yeah, and I guess it's a bit like, so as you say, in the last 12 months, I've done nothing but virtual events because we couldn't do anything physical, and so that's been a real learning curve. And that tech selection, one of the interesting things, because you do still see it, where people are selecting the technology and then working out how they're going to use it afterwards, which for me is just completely the wrong way around. If we were doing physical events, you wouldn't say, right, I've got a contract for the NEC, but this is the event that I want to do, and I can't get it to work within the, you know what you want to do, and then you find something that gives you the best chance of success. And I think that, coming back to your point as well, we were having a conversation this morning where I was saying now is a time of opportunity. We're in a disrupted space in every community, and actually it is a time of opportunity. Yes, it's been really challenging, but coming out of that, if you wait for everything to be perfect before you launch it, you will never launch it. And yes, you don't want to just go out just chucking stuff out willy-nilly, but it's that point that when you launch something, you can't guarantee that it will succeed. But if you never launch it, I can guarantee it won't succeed.
Yeah.
And that still represents, I think, something that is taking that first step and really going for it. And then coming on to, as you say, everyone's, for the most part, people are for profit, particularly in the current climate where they've spent possibly the last 12 months being not for profit, not through choice. Now they want to be looking for profit and looking for new revenue streams and engagement. And this is obviously a huge opportunity, as you've discussed. So how do you price for it? How do you know what the value is of your community? Because obviously it's invaluable to you, but you don't want to underprice it. I think back to when the commercial internet did come in, and we as publishers gave it away as a value add. All your advertising on that started out, or access to it was, well, we still want to get stuff in the print publication, so everything on the internet became free. And trying to turn that back round suddenly became a huge ask and development over years. So how do we make sure that we get the right price without pricing ourselves out of the market, but not undervaluing what we've got?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the tools in the community for community leaders is a persona template. And I think that's a good place to start, is really understanding the constituents of your community. Really giving them a name, understanding what TV shows they watch, understanding what music they listen to, like as much detail as you can understand, and getting that into a persona profile, and getting inside the head of your customer, of the buy and sell side. And then the other thing you need to think about is the monetization opportunity on the sell side, on the sponsorship side, or is it on the buy side? And I think that's the exciting thing about this is I think probably a lot of people on today's webinar monetize the heck out of the sell side, right? The sponsorships, that's where a lot of the money comes in. But I'm here to tell you people are making boatloads of money selling content. And the other place that I would start is, let's say you were thinking about creating a niche training program, or a membership type of model. I would start with scarcity. We're going to have 100 seats at this price. And then also, don't be too shy about your published price, right? And then start to work some channel partnerships with discount codes and other things, and try to get that momentum and kind of, work towards the right price. If you start too low, it's hard to go up. If you start too high, it's easy to go down because of, affiliate type programs.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot that we've covered. I think there's been a lot a lot of insight there. We've certainly got in the last 50 minutes, we've got 30 years worth of advice and support. So I really appreciate that, RD, and really appreciate you being willing to get up at a silly o'clock to get prepped and get tech set up and all the rest of it. So what's the weather like over in the States?
I'm in
Florida, aren't you?
I'm in Florida currently. Yeah, it's going to be 80 and sunny today. Sorry.
Well, to be fair, actually, it's where I am in Tunbridge Wells. It is gloriously sunny to the point that I was actually too hot, because that's the British response. You see, we complain about the rain, gets really sunny. It's a bit hot though. It's a little bit too hot. So if you want to truly embrace being British when you come over next time, that's what you've got to go with. That's the flow. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your insight. As RD said, please do make sure to get in touch with him if you've got any questions or anything that you'd like to follow up with. And in the meantime, don't forget, exhibitions are back. So the Publishing Expo will be opening its doors at Excel on the 22nd and 23rd of June in London. Obviously, International Confex will be running at the same time. So huge crossover and huge opportunity to learn about so many different areas involving community and many other topics. We hope to see you there. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again to RD. Thanks to Mash Media for putting this on. And have a great day.
Thanks, Ed. Great conversation.